November 2nd, 1920, was Warren Harding's 55th birthday. He received a birthday gift that no one else in the U.S. had ever received: a nationwide presidential election victory. What are the odds? I'm Bob Summers, and this is a presidential story. The election of 1920 was a face-off between Republican Warren G. Harding and his vice presidential running mate and future president, Calvin Coolidge, versus Democrat James M. Cox and his vice presidential running mate and future president, Franklin D. Roosevelt. This election was the first one since the end of World War I and the first after the ratification of the 19th Amendment to the Constitution, which gave women the right to vote. As the post-war economy was collapsing, Harding's campaign slogan was "Return to Normalcy," a term he popularized as he tried to heal the country after the war. Cox campaigned for a prolonged international peace, picking up the mantle of President Woodrow Wilson's desire for a League of Nations. On Tuesday, November 2nd, the U.S. electorate would make their preference known. In 1845, Congress had passed the first Unified Election Day law. They were afraid that with the advent of the telegraph, election results from one state could influence the outcome of elections in other states that would happen on a later date. Congress chose the first Tuesday after the first Monday in November, which would fall between November 2nd and November 8th inclusively. Zachary Taylor's 1848 victory, which fell on November 7th, was the first to happen on this unified election day. So, in 1920, that year's election day fell on November 2nd, which also happened to be Harding's 55th birthday. The odds of a random person's birthday falling on election day is about 1 in 1,500, or 0.07%. Interestingly, of the 45 people who had been president, only one other has a birthday that could possibly fall on election day: James K. Polk, and his birthday was also on November 2nd. A fun fact is that if you put 23 random people in a room, there is a 50% chance that 2 of those people will share a birthday. If you bump that up to, say, 45 presidents, the odds are 89% that any 2 will share a birthday. Harding and Polk happen to be those 2 presidents. Polk was elected in 1844, the election before the Uniform Election Day law was passed by Congress. But even if all states voted on the same day in 1844, Tuesday Election Day would have fallen on November 5th, not the 2nd. So even then, Polk would not have shared a birthday and Election Day. So how did Harding spend his birthday/Election Day? The day started in a very ordinary way. Harding and his wife Florence woke up in their modest, green-painted home in Marion, Ohio, and had breakfast in the dining room. Their longtime chauffeur then drove them to their polling place, the Huber Garage on South Greenwood Street, about a third of a mile from their house, where they cast their votes. For Florence, she was one of the less than 50% of eligible women to cast a ballot in the 1920 election, the first election after the ratification of the 19th Amendment 2 months earlier. Her vote made her the first First Lady to vote for her husband in a presidential election. According to wire service reports at the time, after voting, Harding lingered at the polling place for about 30 minutes, chatting with neighbors as they crowded around him. Harding then took a 49-mile car trip to Columbus, Ohio, to play 18 holes of golf at the Scioto Country Club. Opened in 1916, Scioto Country Club was founded by 4 Columbus friends, one of whom was Samuel P. Bush, the grandfather of President George Herbert Walker Bush and great-grandfather to President George Walker Bush. Samuel's son, Prescott Bush, became a U.S. Senator and served as the president of the U.S. Golf Association in 1935. The weather on that early November day was cool and damp, with temperatures falling into the 50s after a rain the previous night and into that morning. Not that a little rain would have stopped him. Harding was such a golf fan that he vowed to play through a driving thunderstorm or even a snowstorm. No one knows what Harding's score was that day, but he rarely shot under 100. But for Harding that day, the score on the links was not the point. According to a wire story, Harding returned home in the early evening, his face flushed by the raw fall air and his spirits heightened by the tramp over the muddy golf links. That evening, surrounded by family and friends at his Marion home while waiting for news of the election results, Harding enjoyed a pink-iced birthday cake, one of nearly 200 cakes delivered to his home by admirers from all over the country. The early election results coming into Marion by telegraph that evening were encouraging. Then, eventually they became a landslide. With over 60% of the popular vote, it was the largest popular vote victory to that point. Shortly after Cox conceded, a group of 50 employees from the newspaper he owned, the Marion Star, arrived at his front door. They wanted to be some of the first to congratulate their boss. They presented Harding with a solid gold newspaper makeup rule inscribed with his birth year, 1865, and the election year, 1920, as well as the November 2nd date of both his birth and election day. By the way, I don't even know what a solid gold newspaper makeup rule would even look like. If you have an idea, I'd love to read your comments. Anyway, Harding was touched they had one of those lying around. Harding, with tears glistening in his eyes, told the group, "You and I have been associated together for many years. I know you, and you know me. I am about to be called to a position of great responsibility. I have been on the square with you, and I want to be on the square with all the world." The entire town of Marion, Ohio, celebrated that night well into the next morning. The Hardings finally turned in around 5 a.m., capping a memorable combination birthday and election day. Thanks for watching.